What happens when you discover your family forged your signature on million-dollar loans while simultaneously uninviting you from your cousin's wedding because your boyfriend doesn't fit their image? What happens when the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally treat you like a walking ATM machine? And what happens when you finally decide you've had enough? This is the story of how one text message changed everything, and why sometimes the best revenge is simply walking away. The mahogany conference table stretched before me like a battlefield, and I was winning. 23 floor-to-ceiling windows framed Seattle's skyline behind me, each pane reflecting the careful precision I'd built my life around. The merger document sat in perfect stacks, fountain pen still warm in my hand from signing what would become the largest acquisition in my firm's history. Congratulations, Brooke. This deal will change everything for Morrison and Associates. My senior partner's voice carried that particular satisfaction that comes with landing a whale. $47 million in legal fees. My commission alone would buy a house in Queen Anne with cash. But money had never been the point. My phone vibrated against the Italian leather portfolio Dad had given me for law school graduation. The same portfolio he'd barely glanced at when I walked across that stage at Stanford. The same portfolio that had carried every brief, every motion, every small victory that built the fortress I now called my career. I glanced down at the screen. Mom's contact photo stared back at me, her perfectly sculpted smile from last year's charity gala, frozen in digital amber. The preview showed just enough text to make my stomach drop. Don't come to Maya's wedding. My fingers moved before my brain could stop them swiping to reveal the full message that would crack something inside me I didn't even know was still fragile. Don't come to Maya's wedding. Do not contact. Family protocol. Family protocol. As if 28 years of my life could be reduced to corporate speak. As if the sister who used to sneak into my room during thunderstorms was now just another board resolution to be handled cleanly, quietly, without fuss. The partners around the table were still talking, their voices fading into white noise as I stared at those 13 words. 13 words that somehow managed to erase every achievement in this room, every late night, every sacrifice I'd made to prove I was worth something. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard. 1,000 responses flashed through my mind. Questions. Accusations. Please. The little girl inside me wanted to type, "Why?" in all caps to demand an explanation that would never come. The lawyer in me wanted to draft a 3-page response citing every family dinner I'd attended, every birthday card I'd sent, every olive branch I'd extended, only to have it snapped in half. Instead, I typed one word. Understood, and hit send. My whole life boiled down to one text, and one word in reply. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was in the most important meeting of my career, surrounded by people who respected my opinion, valued my expertise, treated my voice like it mattered. And somewhere in San Francisco, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had just uninvited me from the most important day in my sister's life. "Brooke, are you with us?" I looked up to find concerned faces staring at me, professional masks barely concealing genuine worry. These people who I'd known for 3 years showed more care in this moment than my own family had in the last 3 decades. "I'm sorry. Family emergency." The words came out steady, practiced. I'd gotten good at packaging my pain in neat, acceptable containers. "Do you need to step out?" "No." I slipped the phone back into my bag, face down. "Let's finish this." But as we dove back into acquisition terms and regulatory compliance, my mind drifted to another conference room, a different kind of meeting, one that happened when I was 7 years old, though I wouldn't understand its significance until much later. It was during one of Dad's dinner parties, the kind where crystal champagne flutes caught the light from our dining room chandelier, where conversations about stock portfolios and vacation homes in Napa flowed as freely as the wine. I'd been sent to bed hours ago, but the sound of laughter and clinking glasses had drawn me to the top of our grand staircase. Mom was in her element, gliding between guests in a dress that probably cost more than most people's rent. Her laugh, bright and musical, carried across the room as she regaled everyone with stories about Ethan's latest achievements. He was only 9, but already showing signs of being the golden child, the one who would carry on the Harrison name with appropriate dignity. And just last week, Mom was saying, Ethan scored the winning goal at his lacrosse tournament. The other parents were so impressed. One of them actually asked if we'd consider letting him play for their club team in Marin. Murmurs of appreciation rippled through the crowd. Dad beamed with pride, his hand resting possessively on Ethan's shoulder, as my brother stood there in his pressed pajamas, soaking up the attention like a plant in sunlight. I pressed my face between the banister rails, waiting. Waiting for someone to ask about me, about the spelling bee I'd won that week beating 5th graders, even though I was only in 2nd grade. About the story I'd written that my teacher had submitted to the district's Young Writers Contest. But the conversation had already moved on, to Dad's latest development project, to the Hastings family's new yacht, to everything and everyone except the little girl watching from the shadows. That was the first time I learned I was invisible. Not ignored exactly, that would have been cruel, and the Harrisons were never cruel, just invisible. Overlooked, the kind of not quite neglect that's impossible to complain about because, technically, nothing is wrong. I had everything a child could want, a beautiful room with custom furniture, private tutors, writing lessons, piano lessons, art classes, every opportunity except the one that mattered most, to be seen. Brooke's such an independent child, Mom would tell her friends when they asked about me at all. She doesn't need as much attention as Ethan. She's perfectly content on her own. And I was because I had to be. I learned to celebrate my victories in silence, to lick my wounds in private, to build my self-worth from the inside out because no external validation was coming. By the time I was 10, I'd stopped expecting birthday parties that weren't afterthoughts. By 12, I'd stopped expecting anyone to come to my school events. By 16, I'd stopped expecting anything at all. The Harrison family legacy wasn't just about money or social standing. It was about performance, about presenting the right image to the right people at the right time. Ethan, with his natural charisma and golden boy charm, was born for this role. He could work a room by age 8, charming elderly donors and impressing business associates with equal ease. I was the footnote, the also-ran, the daughter who existed on Christmas cards and family photos but never quite fit the narrative they were trying to sell. Family protocol, Mom had written, as if we were a corporation instead of people who were supposed to love each other. But maybe that's all we'd ever been. Harrison Industries extended into every aspect of our lives, including the dinner table. Success was measured in quarterly reports, relationships were strategic alliances, and love was conditional on performance metrics I could never quite meet. The conference room around me came back into focus as my phone buzzed again. For a split second, hope fluttered in my chest. Maybe Mom had reconsidered. Maybe she'd realized what she'd done and was calling to apologize, to tell me there had been some terrible mistake. Instead, it was a notification from Instagram. Maya had posted another engagement photo. She and Trevor looked radiant, surrounded by what appeared to be our entire extended family, at some kind of pre-wedding celebration I hadn't known was happening. Cousin Sarah was there, beaming in the background. Uncle Michael and Aunt Linda raising champagne glasses in a toast. Even our grandmother, who claimed she was too frail to travel, was seated front and center with a smile I hadn't seen since Ethan's college graduation. Everyone was there. Everyone except me. The caption read, "So grateful for family. Can't wait to celebrate with everyone who matters most. Everyone who matters most." The message was clear even without the direct text from Mom. I wasn't just uninvited to the wedding. I'd been edited out of the story entirely. 28 years of shared history reduced to a footnote that could be deleted without anyone missing the content. "I think we're good here, Brooke. Outstanding work as always." The words filtered through my emotional fog. The meeting was ending. Papers were being shuffled. Hands were being shaken. I stood up on autopilot, accepting congratulations, and scheduling follow-up meetings while my mind reeled with the implications of Mom's text. But as I gathered my things and prepared to leave, something shifted inside me. A clarity I hadn't felt in years began to crystallize around the edges of my hurt. They wanted family protocol fine. They'd get exactly that. For 28 years, I'd played by their rules. I'd absorbed their indifference, internalized their dismissal, and convinced myself that their love was something I had to earn, rather than something I deserved. I'd twisted myself into shapes that might fit their definition of worthy, only to discover that no shape would ever be right. But sitting in that conference room, surrounded by people who valued my contributions without requiring me to audition for their approval, I finally understood something that had taken 3 decades to learn. I didn't need their permission to exist. I didn't need their validation to have worth. And I sure as hell didn't need their invitation to know my own value. My phone buzzed one more time, another Instagram notification, another glimpse into the family celebration I'd been excluded from. But this time, instead of hurt, I felt something else. Something that scared me and thrilled me in equal measure. Freedom. Understood, I'd written back. And for the first time in my life, I truly did understand. I understood that family protocol was code for, "We don't want you here." I understood that Maya's wedding was just the latest excuse to formalize what had always been true. I understood that the little girl who used to hide at the top of the stairs, hoping someone would notice her, had grown into a woman who didn't need to hide anymore. Most importantly, I understood that the name on my business cards, the name on my diplomas, the name that had carried me from Stanford Law to the top of my field, that name belonged to me now. Not to the legacy that had never claimed me. Not to the family that had never seen me. To me. That was the moment I knew I had to reclaim my name. All of it. The achievements they'd minimized, the strength they'd overlooked, the worth they'd never bothered to calculate. I was done being the Harrison they could forget about. I was done being the daughter who existed at their convenience. It was time to be Brooke Harrison on my own terms. And if that made me a stranger to them, well, I'd been a stranger in that house my whole life anyway. At least, now it was by choice. But let me take you back to where this all started. Because understanding why that text hit me like a physical blow requires understanding what it was like to grow up as Ethan Harrison's sister. And trust me, that's a story that explains everything about why I was sitting in a Seattle conference room 28 years old just learning that I wasn't even worth a wedding invitation. Ethan was 2 years older than me, but he might as well have been from a different planet. Where I was quiet and bookish, he was magnetic. Where I overthought everything, he moved through the world with the kind of confidence that only comes from never doubting your place in it. And why would he? From the moment he could walk, the entire Harrison universe revolved around him like he was the sun. I remember the exact moment I realized I was living in his shadow. I was 8 years old, sitting in the back seat of Mom's Mercedes as we drove home from my school's academic awards ceremony. I'd just won 3 awards. Outstanding achievement in mathematics, first place in the Sciences Fair, and the Principal's Award for Academic Excellence. 3 shiny plaques sat beside me on the leather seat, and I kept touching them to make sure they were real. "Mom, did you see when they called my name for the math award? Mrs. Henderson said I was the youngest student to ever win it." "That's nice, sweetheart." Her voice was distracted, barely a murmur as she navigated through Pacific Heights traffic. Her phone was buzzing with notifications, and I could see her glancing at the screen every few seconds. "And the science fair trophy is really heavy. Want to feel it?" That's when I noticed what had her attention. Text after text was coming in about Ethan's lacrosse game. Even though he was only 10, he'd apparently scored the winning goal in some tournament I'd never heard of. Her phone lit up with congratulations from other parents' requests for playdates, invitations to celebration dinners. Meanwhile, my 3 awards sat silent in the back seat, witnesses to a moment that would define the next 20 years of my life. When we got home, Dad was already there, having left work early to hear about Ethan's game. He swept my brother up in one of those bear hugs that made Ethan laugh until he couldn't breathe. spinning him around in our marble foyer like he'd just won the Olympics. There's my champion. Tell me everything. Every single detail. I stood there holding my awards, waiting for my turn. Waiting for someone to ask about my day, about the ceremony, about anything that had happened in my world. But the celebration had already begun, and it didn't include me. Brooke won some academic awards today, Mom mentioned offhandedly as she sorted through the mail. Some academic awards, like they were participation trophies instead of recognition that I'd outperformed students 2 grades older than me. That's great, honey, Dad said, but his eyes never left Ethan. Now, about that goal in the fourth quarter, I learned that night that achievement without an audience is just accomplishment, without applause. And in the Harrison household, there was only room for one spotlight. The pattern became so predictable, I could have written a manual about it. Ethan's soccer games were family events. Mine were afterthoughts. His report cards were celebrated with dinner at our parents' favorite restaurant in Union Square. Mine were acknowledged with a distracted "good job" before being filed away in some drawer I never saw again. But it wasn't just about the big moments. It was about 1,000 tiny cuts that collectively bled me out over the years. Like the time I won the regional spelling bee in 6th grade. I'd studied for months memorizing etymology and root words until I could spell prestidigitation in my sleep. The day of the competition, I was supposed to get my hair done at Mom's salon for a cousin's birthday party later that evening. Mom, the spelling bee starts at 2. Can we move the hair appointment to 4? She barely looked up from her phone. Brooke, we've had this appointment for weeks. Cousin Jennifer's sweet 16 is important. You'll have to choose. Choose. Between the academic competition I'd worked toward all year and a birthday party where I'd spend 3 hours being ignored by relatives who'd ask Ethan about sports and ask me nothing at all. I chose the spelling bee. I won the regional championship beating 7th and 8th graders to earn a spot at the state competition. I came home with a trophy bigger than my head and a $50 gift card to Barnes & Noble. Mom was in the kitchen when I walked in, still in my competition dress. Trophy clutched against my chest like armor. How was Jennifer's party? She asked. I didn't go to the party. I won the spelling bee. State championship, Mom. I'm going to Sacramento. She paused, actually looked at me for the first time that day. Oh, that's wonderful, sweetheart. But you missed Jennifer's party. Brooke family commitments are important. You should have been there. That's when I learned that my victories would always be secondary to other people's social obligations. But Ethan's victories, those were the social obligations. High school was when the comparisons became a full-time job. You should be more like your brother. I heard that phrase so often it should have been our family motto. Ethan was homecoming king junior year prom, king senior year. He was captain of the lacrosse team, president of the student council, and somehow managed to maintain a 3.8 GPA while being the most popular kid in school. Meanwhile, I was valedictorian. You'd think that would count for something. A perfect 4.0 GPA early admission to Stanford scholarship offers from 3 Ivy League schools. But at the dinner table, the conversation was always about Ethan's latest social triumph. Did you hear the Ashfords want Ethan to escort their daughter to the cotillion? Mom would announce over our family dinners, her voice bright with pride. The Ashfords, Harold Ashford from the country club. Dad would lean forward, already calculating the networking potential. The very same. Apparently, Madison has had a crush on Ethan since freshman year. They'd spend 20 minutes discussing the social implications of this teenage romance, mapping out guest lists and venue preferences like they were planning a merger. Meanwhile, I'd sit there picking at my salmon, invisible as always. One night, I decided to test something. It was spring of my senior year, and I just found out I'd been accepted to Stanford Law School's early admission program. Not just accepted, they were offering me a full scholarship plus a research assistantship that would basically pay me to go to law school. I got into Stanford today, I announced during dessert, setting the acceptance letter on the table like evidence in a trial. Mom glanced at it briefly. That's nice, honey. Ethan, tell us more about the lacrosse scouts who were at your game yesterday. Nice. A full ride to one of the most prestigious law programs in the country was nice. But when Ethan got accepted to UCLA a month later with a partial athletic scholarship, Dad actually opened a bottle of champagne. We had a whole celebration dinner complete with extended family and family friends. Uncle Michael gave a toast about the Harrison legacy of excellence. Grandmother presented Ethan with great-grandfather's cufflinks. I sat at the end of the table wearing the same dress I'd worn to my own graduation party that exactly 3 people had attended and realized something that would shape the rest of my life. I could be perfect and it would never be enough. Because perfect wasn't the currency that mattered in this family. Charisma was, social connections were, being the kind of person who made other people feel important was. And I wasn't that person. I was the person who made other people feel uncomfortable with their own mediocrity. The summer before college was when everything came to a head. I'd been planning to go to Stanford since I was 14 years old. I had my dorm assignment, my class schedule, even my work-study job lined up in the law library. It was going to be perfect, my chance to finally exist somewhere I wasn't constantly measured against my brother's shadow. That's when Dad dropped the bomb. "We've been thinking about your college plans," he said one evening in July. We were sitting on the back terrace of our Pacific Heights house, the Golden Gate Bridge visible in the distance like a promise of freedom. "Stanford is fine for undergraduate work, but we think you should consider Harvard Business School after graduation." "Dad, I'm going to law school. We've talked about this." "Law school is expensive, Brooke. And let's be honest, it's not exactly a field where women have an easy time advancing." I stared at him, wondering if he'd somehow missed the part where I'd been accepted with a full scholarship. "I'm not paying for law school. They're paying me." "Scholarships are wonderful, but they're not career planning. Business school would set you up to join Harrison Industries eventually. You could work alongside Ethan, maybe take over the administrative side while he handles development." The administrative side, while he handles development. In other words, I could be his very well-educated secretary. "I don't want to work for Harrison Industries. I want to be a lawyer." Mom set down her wine glass with the kind of precise movement that meant this conversation had been rehearsed. "Brooke, sweetheart, we're thinking about your future. Harvard Business School opens doors that Stanford Law School simply can't. The connections you'd make, the opportunities. What opportunities to spend my life managing other people's successes. To be part of something bigger than yourself," Dad said, his voice taking on that tone he used during board meetings. "The Harrison name means something in this city, in this state. Ethan's going to expand that legacy, but he'll need support. Family support." Family support. Never mind that I'd never asked for family support. Never mind that I'd earned my way to Stanford without their help, without their connections, without their name opening any doors for me. And what if I don't want to support Ethan's legacy? What if I want to build my own AK? The silence that followed was louder than any argument. Dad's face went through several expressions: surprise, disappointment, and finally that familiar look of patient condescension I'd been seeing my whole life. "Brooke, I think you're being unrealistic. Your mother and I have given this a lot of thought, and we really think Harvard Business School is the right path." That night, I lay in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out when my life had stopped being mine to decide. Every achievement I'd earned, every goal I'd set, every dream I dared to have, they all somehow came back to how I could best serve the family narrative. And the family narrative was simple. Ethan was the star, and I was supporting cast. I made my decision that night, not just about college, but about everything. If they wanted to treat me like a side character in their story, fine. I'd write my own story instead. 3 weeks later, I told them I was going to Stanford as planned. "We're not paying for it," Dad said flatly. "I'm not asking you to. This is a mistake, Brooke. You're throwing away opportunities that other people would kill for." "No, Dad, I'm finally taking an opportunity that's actually mine." The morning I left for Stanford, Mom drove me to the airport. It was the first time we'd been alone together in months, and I thought maybe this would be our moment. The scene where she'd tell me she was proud of me, that she understood why I had to choose my own path, that she'd miss me. Instead, we sat in silence until she pulled up to the departure curb. You know you can change your mind, she said as I got out of the car. Harvard Business School would still take you next year. I looked at her through the passenger window, this woman who'd given birth to me, but had never really seen me, and realized something that should have broken my heart, but actually set me free. She didn't want me to succeed. She wanted me to succeed in the way that made her life easier. And those were two completely different things. I'll call you when I get settled, I said. Don't forget about us while you're out there becoming somebody important. But as I walked through those airport doors with my suitcase and my full scholarship and my absolute certainty that I was making the right choice, I realized she had it backwards. I wasn't becoming somebody important. I was finally becoming somebody real. The last thing I heard was Ethan's voice calling from somewhere behind me. He'd driven separately to see me off, and he caught up with me just before security. Hey sis, good luck out there. For a moment, I saw something in his eyes that looked almost like envy. Like maybe being the golden child wasn't as easy as it looked from the outside. Like maybe he'd trade places with me if he could, just to know what it felt like to earn something without having it handed to him. But then the moment passed, and he was Ethan again. Perfect, charming, untouchable Ethan. Thanks, I said. Take care of them for me. Always do, he replied. And I knew it was true. He would take care of them, and they would take care of him, and I would be the Harrison, who'd chosen to be free instead of chosen. As the plane lifted off from SFO, I pressed my face to the window and watched San Francisco shrink below me. Somewhere down there was the house where I'd spent 18 years learning to be invisible, the family who taught me that love was conditional on being the right kind of person. But I was flying towards something else, something that was mine. I just didn't know yet how much it would cost me to claim it. Stanford was everything I dreamed it would be, and law school was even better. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who valued intelligence over social connections, who respected hard work over inherited privilege. My professors didn't care that my father owned half of Pacific Heights. They cared that I could argue a case better than anyone else in my constitutional law seminar. I graduated summa cum laude, passed the California bar on my first try, and had 3 job offers waiting before I even walked across that stage. But here's the thing about finally tasting freedom: once you've had it, you can never go back to being hungry. So when Morrison and Associates offered me a position in their Seattle office, I didn't hesitate. 800 miles between me and San Francisco felt like exactly the right distance to figure out who Brooke Harrison was when she wasn't constantly being compared to Ethan Harrison. Seattle embraced me in a way San Francisco never had. Maybe it was the Pacific Northwest mentality where people cared more about what you could do than who your family was. Maybe it was just the blessing of anonymity. But for the first time in my life, I could walk into a room and be judged on my own merits. And let me tell you, that was intoxicating. Morrison and Associates was everything I'd hoped for in a law firm. They specialized in corporate mergers and acquisitions, the kind of high-stakes deals that required both legal expertise and strategic thinking. I threw myself into the work with the single-minded focus of someone who'd finally found her calling. 70-hour weeks became my norm. I lived on coffee and takeout, treating my Capitol Hill apartment like a hotel room between court appearances and client meetings. My colleagues started calling me the closer because I had this weird ability to find the one clause, the one precedent, the one argument that would seal a deal when everyone else was ready to walk away. Within 2 years, I was handling clients that senior associates usually didn't see until their 5th year. Within 3 years, I was being courted by headhunters from firms in New York and Los Angeles. By my 4th year, Morrison made me the youngest associate partner in the firm's history. I was finally somebody. Not Ethan Harrison's sister, not the disappointment who'd chosen law school over business school. Just Brooke, just me. And it was everything I'd thought it would be. Except for one thing, I was completely alone. Don't get me wrong, I had colleagues I respected, work friends who'd grab drinks after particularly brutal cases. But I'd spent so many years building walls to protect myself from my family's indifference, that I'd never really learned how to let people in. Success was safe. Success was something I could control. But relationships, those required vulnerability, and vulnerability had never been rewarded in the Harrison household. That changed on a Tuesday night in October at a nonprofit fundraiser I almost didn't attend. The Children's Literacy Foundation was hosting their annual gala at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel, and Morrison and Associates had bought a table. I was supposed to be there as the firm representative, schmoozing with potential clients and making small talk about tax-deductible giving. Honestly, it sounded like torture, but part of being a partner meant showing up to these things, so I put on my most professional black dress and prepared to endure 3 hours of networking. I was standing by the silent auction table, pretending to be interested in a weekend getaway to the San Juan Islands when I heard this laugh. Not the polite cocktail party laughter that fills these events, but genuine, unguarded joy. The kind of laugh that makes you turn around to see what could possibly be that funny at a charity gala. That's when I saw him. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair that looked like he'd run his fingers through it, and warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He was wearing a suit that was nice, but not expensive, the kind you buy at Nordstrom rather than have tailored in Milan. But it was the way he was talking to a group of kids from the literacy program that caught my attention. He was down on one knee having an incredibly serious conversation with a 7-year-old about whether Batman or Superman would be better at teaching people to read. The little girl was explaining with great authority that Batman would obviously be better because he's smarter and has more books in his cave. And this man, this stranger in his department store suit, was nodding along like this was the most important literary criticism he'd ever heard. "She's got a point," I found myself saying. "Batman does have that whole library thing going for him." He looked up at me, and I swear something shifted in the air between us. Not the calculated chemistry of a strategic networking conversation, but something real, something I'd never felt before. "Exactly what I was thinking," he said, standing up with a smile that made my stomach do something acrobatic. Though I have to admit, I'm partial to Wonder Woman myself. All those ancient texts she must have studied on Themyscira. The little girl considered this seriously. "Wonder Woman is good too, but she's a princess, so she probably had teachers. Batman had to learn everything by himself." "That's very wise," he said solemnly. "What's your name?" "Emma. What's yours?" "I'm Liam, and this is..." He looked at me expectantly. "Brooke," I said, and realized I was smiling for the first time all evening. "Nice to meet you, Brooke. Emma here was just telling me about the book she's writing. It's about a superhero who fights crime by getting bad guys to read poetry until they realize the error of their ways." I laughed, actually laughed in a way I hadn't in months. "That's brilliant. What's the superhero's name?" "Verse Girl," Emma announced proudly. "She wears a cape made of book pages, but only from books that nobody wants to read anymore." "Environmentally conscious and literarily practical," Liam said. "I like it." We spent the next 20 minutes talking to Emma about her story, and I found myself completely forgetting where I was. This wasn't networking, this wasn't professional obligation. This was just 3 people having a conversation about something that mattered to all of us. When Emma's teacher came to collect her for the program presentation, she hugged both of us goodbye. "You should get married," she announced with the casual confidence of a 7-year-old. "You both like books, and you laugh at the same things." Liam and I looked at each other, both of us blushing like teenagers. "Kids," he said, shaking his head. "No filter whatsoever." "Smart kid, though," I replied before I could stop myself. That's when I knew I was in trouble. We spent the rest of the evening together, talking through the dinner presentations and the auction results. I learned that he taught English at Roosevelt High School, that he volunteered with the Literacy Foundation on weekends, that he'd moved to Seattle from Portland because he wanted to work in a district that actually cared about funding arts education. He told me about his students, about the kid who'd never read a book until Liam introduced him to graphic novels, about the girl who wrote poetry, about her immigrant grandmother's stories. His whole face lit up when he talked about teaching the way Dad's face lit up when he talked about real estate deals, but with none of the calculation. This was pure passion. And here's what struck me most. He never once asked what I did for a living. Not because he wasn't interested, but because he was more interested in what I thought about things. What books I loved, what made me laugh, whether I thought Emma's superhero concept had franchise potential. When he finally did ask about my work, it was almost an afterthought. So, what do you do when you're not attending charity galas and discussing superhero literature with 7-year-olds? I'm a lawyer, I said, waiting for the inevitable follow-up questions about salary and prestige and partnership tracks. Instead, he said, "What kind of law? Please tell me you're not one of those corporate sharks who destroys small businesses for fun." I laughed. I am absolutely one of those corporate sharks, mergers and acquisitions. I help big companies eat smaller companies. Well, he said, grinning, nobody's perfect. And that was it. No judgment, no calculation of my earning potential, no immediate mental categorization of my social utility. Just acceptance, with a side of gentle teasing. By the time the gala ended, I knew I was going to see him again. We exchanged numbers, made plans for coffee that weekend, and I floated home to my Capitol Hill apartment, feeling like I'd discovered some new element on the periodic table. Our first official date was coffee at Victrola on Pike Street. We talked for 4 hours. Our second date was dinner at a tiny Italian place in Georgetown that had checkered tablecloths and candles and wine bottles and absolutely no pretense whatsoever. Our third date was a bookstore crawl through the University District where we built elaborate backstories for other customers based on what they were buying. By our fourth date, I was completely gone. Liam was unlike anyone I'd ever known. He didn't care that my apartment had a view of Elliott Bay or that I drove a BMW. He cared that I kept poetry books on my nightstand and that I cried during the end of Dead Poets Society, even though I'd seen it 12 times. He noticed that I always ordered for other people when we went out with groups, because I was good at reading what they wanted. He remembered that I mentioned loving thunderstorms, and called me during the first big storm of winter just to ask if I was watching the lightning. He didn't care about my last name. He cared about my laugh. For 8 months we existed in this perfect bubble of Seattle contentment. We went hiking in the Cascades, explored farmers' markets, spent lazy Sunday mornings, reading different sections of the newspaper, and sharing the interesting bits. He came to my work events where he charmed my colleagues by asking intelligent questions about their cases. I went to his school plays where I watched him beam with pride as his students performed Shakespeare, with more enthusiasm than technical skill. I had never been happier. I had never felt more myself. Which is probably why I thought it was safe to take him home for Thanksgiving. The invitation came in September the way it always did. Mom's secretary would call to confirm travel arrangements and dietary restrictions, as if Thanksgiving were a board meeting rather than a family gathering. But for the first time in years, I actually wanted to go. I wanted to show them who I'd become, who I was when I wasn't trying to earn their approval. More than that, I wanted them to meet Liam. I wanted them to see what it looked like when someone loved me for exactly who I was. I should have known better. The first red flag came when I told Liam about my family over dinner at our favorite Thai place in Fremont. "So, fair warning," I said, twirling pad thai around my fork. "My family is a lot. Very traditional San Francisco society types. All about appearances and networking and saying the right thing to the right people." "Sounds like fun," he said dryly. "Should I practice my cocktail party, small talk?" "Just be yourself, they'll love you." But even as I said it, I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach. The same knot I'd carried through 18 years of trying to be enough for people who'd never quite understood what enough meant. "What does your dad do?" Liam asked. "Real estate development. Harrison Industries. They've developed about half of Pacific Heights over the last 30 years. "And your mom, professional society wife, charity boards, fundraising committees, Social organizing. She's very good at it. What about your brother Ethan? Right? I hesitated. Ethan works with Dad. He's being groomed to take over the company eventually. Golden boy star athlete, everything my parents ever wanted in a child. Liam reached across the table and took my hand. And what are you? The question hit me harder than it should have. I'm the one who left. The flight to San Francisco felt different with Liam beside me. Usually the descent into SFO filled me with dread, like I was flying backward through time to become the invisible child again. But, with his hand in mine, watching him point out landmarks through the airplane window, I felt like maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time I wouldn't have to disappear. Mom picked us up from the airport in her pristine white Range Rover, the kind of vehicle that screams, "I have a housekeeper who details my car twice a week." She was perfectly put together as always. Designer jeans that probably cost more than Liam's monthly rent. Cashmere sweater in exactly the right shade of camel makeup that had been professionally applied for a casual Tuesday afternoon. "Brooke, darling." She air-kissed my cheeks in the practiced way of someone who'd learned affection as a social skill. "You look wonderful. A little thin, but wonderful." "Thanks, Mom. Love you too. And you must be Liam." She turned to him with the bright, assessing smile she usually reserved for charity donors. "I've heard so much about you." "All good things, I hope," Liam said with the easy charm that had won over Emma at the literacy gala. "Of course," but I caught the way her eyes took inventory, his off-the-rack jacket, his scuffed shoes, the fact that he was carrying his own luggage instead of expecting someone else to handle it. The drive home was 45 minutes of Mom fishing for information while pretending to make small talk. "So, Liam, Brooke tells me you're a teacher. How lovely. What grade? High school English? Mostly juniors and seniors?" "Oh, how rewarding. Public school?" "Yes, Roosevelt High School. Great district, really committed to arts education." I watched Mom process this information, saw the exact moment she calculated his probable salary and found it wanting. "How nice. And have you always wanted to be a teacher?" The interrogation continued all the way through Pacific Heights, past the mansions that lined the streets like monuments to inherited wealth. I saw Liam taking it all in. The perfectly manicured gardens, the security gates, the casual luxury that had been my normal until I'd learned that normal was relative. When we pulled into our circular driveway, I watched his face register the full scope of what he was walking into. The Harrison family home wasn't just a house. It was a statement. 3 stories of Victorian architecture with modern updates. Bay windows that framed views of the Golden Gate Bridge gardens that belonged in magazines. "Holy shit," Liam whispered under his breath. "Language," I whispered back, but I was smiling. Welcome to the Harrison legacy. Dad was waiting in the foyer, dressed in the kind of casual Friday outfit that probably cost more than most people's formal wear. He shook Liam's hand with the firm grip he'd perfected for business meetings, the kind that was supposed to convey authority and assessment in equal measure. "Martin Harrison, welcome to our home." "Thank you, sir. It's beautiful." "We've been lucky," Dad said in the tone that meant we'd earned every bit of that luck through superior decision-making and financial acumen. Ethan appeared at the top of the staircase like he was making an entrance in a play. Still the golden boy at 26, still carrying himself with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. He bounded down the stairs with that athletic grace that had made him a star lacrosse player in high school. "There's my little sister." He swept me up in one of those bear hugs that used to make me feel loved before I understood they were performances for an audience. "Look at you looking all successful and lawyery." "Hi, Ethan." I hugged him back, and for a moment, I felt like I was 8 years old again, grateful for any attention from my big brother. And this must be the famous Liam. Ethan turned to my boyfriend with that megawatt smile that had charmed teachers, coaches, and countless girls throughout his academic career. "I'm Ethan, the better-looking brother." "Only brother," I corrected. "Details." He shook Liam's hand with genuine warmth. At least Ethan's charm was real, even if everything else about our family dynamics was complicated. That's when she appeared. Madison Westbrook, Ethan's fiancée, descended the staircase like she was floating. Tall, blonde, with the kind of effortless elegance that comes from growing up in governor's mansions and Swiss boarding schools. She was everything I would never be, socially perfect, politically connected, and absolutely stunning in a way that made you forget what you were talking about. You must be Brooke, she said in a voice like honey over champagne. I've heard so much about you. Ethan talks about his brilliant little sister all the time. Brilliant little sister, like I was a precocious child instead of a 26-year-old partner at a major law firm. And you're Madison, I replied. Congratulations on the engagement. Thank you, we're so excited. The wedding planning has been absolutely insane, but in the best way possible. Within 5 minutes, the conversation had pivoted entirely to wedding details. The venue, a private estate in Napa that could accommodate 300 guests. The flowers, white orchids flown in from Hawaii. The band, the same one that had played at Madison's parents' anniversary party last year. Madison's mother has been such a help with the planning, Mom gushed. Catherine Westbrook has exquisite taste. She planned Governor Westbrook's inaugural ball, you know. Of course she did, because in the Harrison family, even wedding planning was a networking opportunity. I stood there listening to them discuss centerpieces and seating charts, watching Liam's face as he slowly understood the scale of what he'd walked into. This wasn't just a family dinner. This was a display of social capital, a demonstration of the Harrison family's place in San Francisco's elite hierarchy. And I was the family member who'd stepped outside that hierarchy. Dinner was served in our formal dining room, the one with the crystal chandelier and the antique Persian rug, and the table that could seat 12 people comfortably. Mrs. Chen, our housekeeper since I was a child, had prepared the kind of meal that required actual cooking skills rather than opening containers from Whole Foods. The conversation flowed around topics I'd expected: Ethan's latest real estate projects, Madison's work with the California Arts Council, Dad's plans for expanding Harrison Industries into sustainable development. Mom held court like the accomplished hostess. She was ensuring everyone's wine glass stayed full and that conversation never lagged. But I noticed something I'd never picked up on before. Every topic, every story, every seemingly casual anecdote somehow circled back to connections and status. Ethan's project wasn't just successful, it was successful because he'd partnered with the Ashford family. Madison's Arts Council work wasn't just fulfilling. It was fulfilling because she was working directly with the governor's office on new cultural initiatives. Everything was currency in a social economy I'd forgotten I'd once been part of. So, Liam, Dad said during the main course, carving into his steak with surgical precision, tell me about teaching. What made you choose education? It was the question I'd been dreading delivered with the tone of someone asking about a hobby rather than a career. I love literature, Liam said simply. And I love watching students discover that books can change how they see the world. There's nothing quite like seeing a kid who's never enjoyed reading suddenly understand why people get excited about poetry. How noble, Mom said, and I caught the slight edge beneath her smile. It must be very rewarding work. It is? And the pay? Dad asked with the bluntness that made him successful in business negotiations. I imagine public school teachers don't exactly get rich. I felt my face burn. Dad. What? It's a practical question. If you're serious about this young man, these are things you need to consider. Liam handled it with more grace than I would have. You're right, Mr. Harrison. Teaching isn't a path to wealth, but it's a path to impact, and that matters more to me than money. Impact! Dad repeated like he was tasting an unfamiliar word. That's admirable, but impact doesn't pay mortgages. Martin, Mom said in her warning tone. Let's not talk business at the dinner table. But the damage was done. The question hung in the air like smoke. What exactly did I think I was doing with someone who chose impact over income? The conversation moved on to safer topics, but I felt myself shrinking back into the familiar patterns of childhood. Sitting quietly while other people discussed more important things, smiling and nodding while my own life was dismissed as irrelevant to the larger family narrative. After dinner, we moved to the living room for coffee, and the kind of after-dinner conversation that used to put me to sleep as a child. Ethan and Dad discussed market trends in Bay Area real estate. Mom and Madison planned a shopping trip to Union Square for bridesmaid dress consultations. Everyone had a role to play in the Harrison family production. Everyone, except me. I excused myself to use the bathroom and found myself climbing the stairs to my childhood bedroom instead. Nothing had changed. The same white four-poster bed, the same built-in bookshelves lined with novels I'd read and reread throughout high school, the same window seat where I used to sit and watch other people's lives happen outside my window. I sat down on the bed and felt 18 years old again. Invisible, unnecessary, fundamentally wrong for reasons I could never quite identify. That's where Liam found me 20 minutes later. "Hey," he said softly from the doorway. "You disappeared." "Sorry, just needed a minute." He came and sat beside me on the bed, taking in the room that had been my sanctuary and my prison for so many years. Nice room. Very you. Very me at 18, maybe, before I learned who I actually was. And who are you actually? I looked at him, this man who'd somehow seen me clearly from our first conversation, who'd never needed me to be anything other than exactly who I was. I don't know anymore. Being here, it's like I revert to this earlier version of myself. The one who was never quite good enough, never quite right. "Brooke," he took my hands, made me look at him. "Your family doesn't define you. What they think about your choices about me, about anything. That doesn't determine your worth. But they're my family. Family is supposed to lift you up, not tear you down. They're supposed to celebrate your successes, not dismiss them. They're supposed to want you to be happy." I felt tears, starting the kind I'd been holding back for hours. They don't understand what makes me happy. Do they want to understand? That was the question I'd been avoiding for 8 years. Did they want to understand, or did they just want me to fit into their predetermined idea of who I should be? "I don't think so," I whispered. Liam pulled me against his chest, and I let myself cry for the first time since I'd walked into this house. Cried for the little girl who'd tried so hard to earn love that was supposed to be freely given. Cried for the young woman who'd had to choose between her dreams and her family's approval. Cried for the adult who still hoped that somehow, someday, they'd see her for who she really was. "If they can't see you," Liam said into my hair, "they don't deserve you." And sitting there in my childhood bedroom, wrapped in the arms of someone who loved me without conditions, I finally understood what I'd been searching for my whole life. I didn't need their approval to be worthy of love. I just needed to love myself enough to stop asking for it. That night in my childhood bedroom with Liam should have been the end of my story with my family. Should have been the moment I finally cut the cord and stopped hoping for something that was never going to come. But hope is a stubborn thing, and family guilt is even more stubborn. For 2 years, after that Thanksgiving disaster, I kept my distance. Polite phone calls on birthdays, Christmas cards, with generic messages, the kind of minimal contact that keeps you technically in the family without actually being part of it. Liam and I built our life in Seattle, and it was beautiful. We moved in together, adopted a rescue dog named Scout, spent weekends hiking and cooking elaborate dinners, and talking about everything except my family. I thought I was free. I thought I'd finally learned to stop caring what they thought about my choices. Then Dad called with the cosign request, and I discovered that freedom is a lot more fragile than I'd imagined. It was a Tuesday morning in March 3 years ago. I was in my office reviewing contracts for a biotech merger when my assistant buzzed me. "Brooke, your father's online too. Says it's important." My father never called me at work. In fact, my father rarely called me at all. Our relationship had settled into a comfortable pattern of mutual avoidance punctuated by obligatory holiday check-ins. So, when I picked up that phone, my first thought was that someone had died. Dad, is everything okay? Brooke, sweetheart, thank you for taking my call. I know you're busy with your important lawyer work. The phrase important lawyer work came out with just enough condescension to remind me that he still didn't quite understand what I did for a living, but enough warmth to suggest this conversation was going somewhere I wouldn't like. Is Mom okay, Ethan? Everyone's fine. Actually, that's why I'm calling. I have some exciting news about Ethan's latest project, and I was hoping you might be able to help us out with a small favor. A small favor. In Harrison, family speak small favors were never small. What kind of favor? Well, Ethan's been working on this incredible development project in Soma. Luxury condos, mixed-use retail space, really cutting-edge sustainable design. It's exactly the kind of forward-thinking development that's going to define San Francisco's future. I waited for him to get to the point, already feeling the familiar dread that came with any conversation that started with praising Ethan's accomplishments. The thing is, we need some additional financing to get the project off the ground. Banks these days, you know how they are. So cautious, so focused on short-term thinking instead of vision. We've got most of the funding lined up, but we need someone with excellent credit to co-sign on one of the construction loans. And there it was, the ask that I should have seen, coming from the moment he said Ethan's name. How much are we talking about? 1.2 million. I know it sounds like a lot, but it's really just a formality. The project is fully funded through other sources. This is just to satisfy some regulatory requirement about having multiple guarantors. Your name would be on the paperwork, but you'd never actually be responsible for anything. $1.2 million. The casual way he said it, like he was asking me to co-sign for a car loan instead of an amount that represented more money than I'd made in my entire career. Dad, I don't know anything about real estate development. Wouldn't it make more sense to find someone in the industry? Brooke, your family, and you're successful, established exactly the kind of guarantor the bank is looking for. Besides, this would be a chance for you to be part of something important that Ethan's building. Part of something important that Ethan's building. Not something we were building together. Something Ethan was building that I could be permitted to support. I need to think about this. Of course, but the timeline is a little tight. We need to submit the paperwork by Friday to keep the project on schedule. 3 days. He was asking me to co-sign for over $1 million with 3 days to decide. Can you send me the details? The project plans, the financing structure? All of it. Absolutely. I'll have my assistant email everything over this afternoon. But Brooke, I want you to know how much this means to us. To Ethan. He's been hoping you'd want to be involved in his work. After I hung up, I sat in my office staring out at Elliott Bay, trying to figure out why I felt like I'd just been manipulated by a master. Dad had managed to frame a massive financial favor as an opportunity for me to finally be included in the family business. Like I should be grateful for the chance to risk my financial future on Ethan's real estate dreams. The project documents arrived that afternoon, and I spent the evening going through them with the kind of legal scrutiny I usually reserved for hostile takeovers. On paper, everything looked legitimate. The development was ambitious but realistic. The financing structure was complex but sound, and the timeline was aggressive but achievable. But something nagged at me. Maybe it was the way Dad had emphasized that my involvement would be just a formality. Maybe it was the tight timeline that didn't leave room for proper due diligence. Or maybe it was just the lifetime of experience that had taught me to be suspicious whenever my family suddenly decided they needed me. That night, I talked it over with Liam while we cooked dinner in our Capitol Hill kitchen. Scout was lying at our feet hoping someone would drop something edible, and NPR was playing softly in the background. It was the kind of peaceful domestic scene that had become my definition of home. So, let me get this straight, Liam said, chopping vegetables for our stir-fry. Your father, who hasn't called you in 6 months, suddenly needs you to co-sign for $1 million loan for your brother's business project. $1.2 million. And it's not really for Ethan. It's for Harrison Industries. Brooke. He set down his knife and looked at me with that expression that meant he was about to say something I didn't want to hear. This sounds like a trap. It's not a trap, it's just business. No, it's not just business. If it were just business, they'd go through proper commercial lending channels. They wouldn't need a family member to co-sign. I knew he was right. I'd reviewed enough corporate financing deals to understand that legitimate projects didn't usually require family members to provide personal guarantees. But I also knew something else, something I couldn't quite admit out loud. This felt like a chance to finally be needed by my family for something important. A chance to prove that I wasn't just the daughter who'd run away to play lawyer in Seattle. A chance to be part of the Harrison legacy instead of standing outside it looking in. They said it's just a formality. Brooke, listen to yourself. You're one of the smartest people I know. You wouldn't advise a client to co-sign for anything based on, it's just a formality. But this is different. How is it different? Because it's my family. And there it was. The truth I'd been dancing around for 36 hours. I wanted to believe that this request meant they finally saw me as valuable, as worthy of inclusion. I wanted to believe that signing those papers would somehow sign me back into their lives in a meaningful way. Liam sat down at our kitchen table and pulled me into the chair beside him. Baby, I know you love your family. I know you want them to see you and value you the way you deserve. But this isn't the way. This is them needing something from you, not them valuing you as a person. You don't understand the situation. I understand that you've spent your entire life trying to earn their approval, and it's never been enough. I understand that every time you think you've moved past their opinion of you, they find a way to pull you back in. And I understand that if something goes wrong with this loan, you're the one who's going to be financially responsible, not them. He was right about all of it. But the little girl inside me, the one who used to sit at the top of the stairs, hoping someone would notice her, was screaming that this might be my last chance to matter to them. The next morning, Ethan called. Brooke, Dad told me about the cosign. I can't tell you how much this means to me. Just hearing his voice brought back 28 years of wanting his approval, his attention, his acknowledgement that I was worthy of being his sister. Tell me about the project, Ethan. What makes this one special? For the next 30 minutes, he painted a picture of a development that would transform a neglected corner of Soma into a sustainable mixed-income community. He talked about affordable housing units, green building standards, partnerships with local artists for public installations. It sounded like everything I'd ever hoped the Harrison family business could become. This isn't just about making money, Brooke. This is about making a difference. About proving that development can actually improve communities instead of just displacing them. It sounds amazing. It could be. But only if we can get this financing through. The banks are so risk-averse right now, they can't see the bigger picture. Having your name on the loan would change everything. Ethan, I don't really understand real estate finance. Are you sure this is something I should be involved in? Brooke, you're the smartest person I know. If anyone can understand the legal implications and make sure we're protected, it's you. Besides, this is family. We look out for each other. We look out for each other. When was the last time my family had looked out for me? The loan documents look pretty standard, I said, half trying to convince myself. That's because it is standard. Dad's being overly cautious about the cosigner requirement, but you know how he is about dotting every I and crossing every T. Your signature is just going to make the bank feel better about the whole thing. That afternoon, I found myself in the offices of Harrison Industries for the first time since I'd graduated from law school. The Pacific Heights building was everything I remembered from childhood visits. Marble floors, oil paintings of San Francisco, landmarks, the kind of understated luxury that whispered success rather than shouting it. Dad was waiting in his corner office with a loan document spread across his mahogany desk like evidence in a trial. Everything looked exactly as it had been described, a standard construction loan with multiple guarantors, my signature required as an additional assurance for the lending bank. "I've had our attorneys review everything," Dad said as I flipped through the pages. "It's all standard language. Your liability is limited to the principal amount, and only in the event of default on the primary borrower." I read through the terms carefully, my legal training kicking in, despite my emotional confusion. The document was professionally drafted, the terms were clearly specified, and the liability structure was exactly what Dad had described. But as I sat there with a Mont Blanc pen in my hand, preparing to sign my name to $1 million commitment, I thought about what Liam had said. This felt less like an opportunity, and more like a test. A test of whether I was still willing to subordinate my own judgment to my family's needs. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why me? I mean, Harrison Industries must have other financing options. Why do you need a family member to co-sign?" He leaned back in his leather chair, and for a moment I saw something in his face that looked almost like vulnerability. "Brooke, I'm going to be honest with you. The real estate market has been challenging lately. Some of our earlier projects didn't perform as well as projected, and our credit line with the traditional lenders has become more restrictive. Having someone with your professional reputation and clean credit history involved in the project sends a signal to the bank that we're serious about this development. So this isn't just a formality. It's a formality in the sense that we don't expect you to ever be called upon to fulfill the guarantee. But it's not a formality in the sense that your involvement is crucial to getting the project approved." At least he was being honest. This wasn't about including me in the family business. This was about using me to solve a problem that Dad and Ethan couldn't solve on their own. But somehow, being needed felt close enough to being valued that I convinced myself the distinction didn't matter. I signed the papers. The moment my pen lifted off that signature line, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that I'd finally done something my family actually wanted me to do. Anxiety about the financial commitment I just made. And underneath it all, a dangerous flutter of hope that maybe this would change things between us. For the next few months, it seemed like it had. Dad called me monthly with updates on the project's progress. Ethan sent photos from the construction site showing me how the building was taking shape. Mom mentioned at our quarterly family dinner that she was proud of me for supporting Ethan's vision. I felt like I'd finally earned my place at the table. But then the calls became less frequent. The progress updates stopped coming. When I asked direct questions about timelines and milestones, I got vague answers about permit delays and weather complications. The thing about co-signing for family is that you can't exactly demand regular financial reports, the way you would from a business partner. You're supposed to trust that they have your best interests at heart, that they wouldn't put you at risk unless there was no other choice. You're supposed to believe that love and blood create protection that contracts can't provide. I was naive enough to believe that for 3 years, until 2 months ago, when I found out about Maya's engagement from Instagram. I was having lunch at my desk scrolling through social media while eating a salad from the place downstairs when a photo popped up that made me choke on my arugula. Maya, my cousin Megan's younger sister, beaming at the camera with a diamond ring the size of a marble. The caption read, "She said yes. Welcome to the family. Trevor, can't wait to celebrate with everyone." Maya was 24, fresh out of USC, working her first job at a nonprofit in Los Angeles. We'd never been particularly close, but we'd grown up together, shared family holidays, survived the same boring extended family gatherings. I remembered teaching her to braid friendship bracelets when she was 8 and I was 12. But what struck me wasn't the engagement itself. It was the flood of congratulatory comments from family members I'd barely spoken to in years. Uncle Michael and Aunt Linda, cousin Sarah, even my grandmother who could barely figure out how to use her iPhone. Everyone was chiming in with excitement and celebration. I scrolled through the comments looking for some mention of wedding plans, dates, venues, and that's when I saw it. Cousin Jennifer's comment about how excited she was to be a bridesmaid, followed by Aunt Linda's response about how beautiful the ceremony was going to be in September. September, as in 2 months away. I called Megan that afternoon ostensibly to congratulate her on her sister's engagement, but really to fish for information. Brooke, oh my God, I was just thinking about you. How are things in Seattle? Good, really good. I saw Maya's announcement on Instagram. I'm so happy for her. Isn't it wonderful? We're all just over the moon. Trevor is such a sweet guy and they're perfect together. So tell me about the wedding. September, right? There was a pause on Megan's end of the line, the kind of pause that means someone is choosing their words carefully. September 23rd. It's going to be beautiful. They're having it at the family vineyard in Sonoma. That sounds lovely. I should probably get them an engagement gift. Where are they registered? Another pause longer this time. Brooke, I assumed you were too busy to come. That's what your mom said when we were doing the initial guest list planning. The world shifted slightly underneath me, like I was standing on a deck during an earthquake. My mom said I was too busy to come to Maya's wedding. Well, not exactly. She just said that with your work schedule and everything, family events were difficult for you to attend. And since you and Maya aren't super close... Megan, did I get an invitation? No, I don't think so, but I just assumed that was because your mom had talked to you about it privately. I hung up the phone and sat in my office for 20 minutes staring out at Seattle's skyline and trying to process what I just learned. My own family had discussed my attendance at a family wedding and decided without consulting me that I wouldn't want to come. They'd written me out of the story before the story even began. That night, I went through every family text chain, every email thread, every social media post from the last 6 months. Looking for any mention of Maya's engagement, any hint that a wedding was being planned, any indication that I was supposed to know about this major family event. Nothing. I'd been completely excluded from the planning, the excitement, the anticipation. Erased from the guest list as casually as you'd remove someone who'd moved to another country and lost touch years ago. But here's what really hurt: this was happening while I was still financially tied to them through the cosign. While my name was on legal documents that made me responsible for over $1 million of their debt. While I was still receiving monthly thank you calls from Dad about how grateful they were for my support. I was good enough to co-sign their loans, but not good enough to get a wedding invitation. I was good enough to bail them out financially, but not good enough to be included in family celebrations. I was good enough to be useful, but not good enough to be loved. That's when I started asking harder questions about the loan, about the project status, about the timeline for completion, about when my name would be removed from the guarantee. Questions that I should have been asking all along, but had been too grateful for their attention to pursue. The answers I got were increasingly vague. The project was moving forward. The timeline was flexible due to market conditions. My guarantee would be released once the permanent financing was secured. But no specific dates. No concrete milestones, no clear path to getting my name off those documents. For the first time since I'd signed those papers, I started to wonder if I'd been played, not maliciously maybe, not with the intention to hurt me, but played nonetheless, used for my credit and my signature and my desperate need to feel valued by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. The wedding invitation that never came was just the confirmation of what I should have understood 3 years ago. I wasn't family in any way that mattered to them. I was a resource to be utilized when convenient and ignored when inconvenient. I was a cosigner, not a daughter. And sitting in that conference room 2 months later, reading Mom's text about family protocol, I finally understood the full scope of how thoroughly I'd been fooled into thinking that financial entanglement meant emotional inclusion. They'd kept me on the hook financially while cutting me out socially. They'd used my signature while discarding my presence. They'd taken my money and refused my love. But here's the thing about finally seeing the truth. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you can't unsee it, you can finally do something about it. The loan documents were sitting in my safety deposit box at home, my signature binding me to their success or failure for as long as they chose to keep me bound. But signatures can be revoked, guarantees can be withdrawn, and daughters can choose to stop being available for financial exploitation. That text from mom about not coming to the wedding, it wasn't just an uninvitation. It was permission to finally set myself free. You'd think that finding out I'd been excluded from a family wedding would have been my breaking point. You'd think that discovering my own mother had told people I was too busy to attend an event I'd never been invited to would have been enough to make me walk away forever. But here's the thing about family trauma. It makes you do irrational things. It makes you fight for scraps of affection from people who've already decided you're not worth a full meal. It makes you show up places you're not wanted, hoping that somehow your presence will change their minds about your worth. So when I realized I'd been excluded from Maya's wedding, I did something completely insane. I decided to crash it, not the ceremony itself. I wasn't completely delusional. But the rehearsal dinner, the pre-wedding events where extended family would be gathering and my absence would be noticed, I convinced myself that showing up would force a conversation, would make them explain to my face why I hadn't been included. I told myself I was being brave, finally standing up for myself. Really, I was setting myself up for the most humiliating experience of my adult life. I called Liam on a Thursday morning, 2 weeks before the wedding, while I was supposed to be reviewing contracts for a pharmaceutical merger. "Hey, want to take a long weekend in Sonoma? I know it's last minute, but I thought we could do some wine tasting. Maybe stay at that bed and breakfast we went to for your birthday." Sonoma, that sounds great, but why the sudden urge for wine country? I took a deep breath, knowing how this was going to sound. Maya's wedding is next weekend. The rehearsal dinner is Friday night at the family vineyard. There was a long pause on Liam's end of the phone. "Brooke, weren't you just telling me that you didn't get an invitation to this wedding?" "I didn't, but that's why I need to be there. I need to confront this head on instead of just accepting their decision to exclude me. Baby, I don't think showing up uninvited to a family event is going to give you the closure you're looking for. It's not about closure. It's about demanding the respect I deserve. I'm tired of being erased from their lives while they still expect me to be financially responsible for their mistakes." That was the argument that finally convinced him, because Liam understood better than anyone how much the cosign situation had been eating at me. How every month that passed without my name being removed from those loan documents felt like another month of being trapped in their orbit. "Okay," he said finally, "but we're staying in our own hotel, and if this goes badly, we're leaving. No heroic stands, no dramatic confrontations. We make our point and we get out." Deal. I booked us a room at the farmhouse inn about 20 minutes from the vineyard where the rehearsal dinner was being held. I told my assistant to clear my schedule for Friday and Monday, claiming I needed a long weekend for personal reasons. I even went shopping for a new dress, something appropriately elegant for a wine country event, but not so formal that I'd look like I was trying too hard. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was putting more thought into an event I hadn't been invited to than my family had put into including me in the first place. We drove up to Sonoma on Friday afternoon, the windows down and music playing as we wound through the hills covered in late summer grapevines. It should have been romantic, this spontaneous getaway with the man I loved. Instead, I spent the entire drive second-guessing my decision and trying to prepare for every possible scenario. What if they asked me to leave? What if they pretended they were glad to see me? What if Mom had a complete meltdown in front of the entire extended family? Liam reached over and took my hand as we pulled into the vineyard's parking lot. "You don't have to do this. We could still turn around, go back to the hotel, spend the weekend doing literally anything else." "I have to do this. I need to understand why I've never been enough for them." Or you could accept that their failure to see your worth says nothing about your actual worth. That's very zen of you, but I need answers. The vineyard was exactly the kind of place my family would choose for a major event, rolling hills, dotted with perfectly maintained vines, a tasting room that looked like it belonged in a magazine, and views that made you understand why people paid ridiculous amounts of money for Sonoma real estate. Cars were already arriving for the rehearsal dinner. I recognized my Aunt Linda's silver Lexus, my cousin Sarah's white BMW, even my grandmother's ancient Cadillac that she insisted on driving herself despite being 87 years old. But as we walked toward the main building, I started to notice things that made my stomach clench. Everyone was dressed in variations of the same color palette, soft blues and sage greens, like they'd all gotten a memo about what to wear. A memo I obviously hadn't received. I was wearing a burgundy dress that had looked elegant and appropriate in my Seattle apartment, but now felt completely wrong. Too dark, too formal, too obviously from someone who hadn't been part of the planning process. Brooke, oh my God, what are you doing here? I turned to see my cousin Jennifer walking toward us, her face cycling through surprised confusion and what looked like panic. Hi, Jennifer. We were in the area and thought we'd stop by to congratulate Maya. But Mom said you weren't coming. Change of plans. Jennifer looked like she was trying to solve a complex math problem in her head. Let me go find Aunt Rachel. I'm sure she'll want to know you're here. She hurried away, leaving Liam and me standing on the gravel path like uninvited guests at our own family gathering, which technically we were. This was a mistake, I whispered to Liam. We can still leave. But before I could answer, Mom appeared walking toward us with the kind of determined stride that meant someone was about to get managed. She looked stunning, of course. Dressed in a flowing sage green dress that perfectly complemented the vineyard, setting her hair and makeup professionally done for the photographer who was discreetly capturing candid moments throughout the evening. Brooke, what a surprise. Her voice was carefully neutral, the tone she used when she was trying not to make a scene in public. Hi, Mom. You look beautiful. Thank you. Did you not get the color palette information? I thought I sent that to everyone weeks ago. The color palette information. Of course there had been a color palette. Of course everyone had been told what to wear except me. Of course my first interaction with my mother in 6 months was her pointing out that I'd gotten it wrong. I must have missed that email, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Well, you're here now. She looked at Liam with the same assessing expression she'd worn 3 years ago. Hello, Liam. Mrs. Harrison, thank you for having us. Of course, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. Let me introduce you to some people, though I should mention the seating chart is already finalized. She trailed off, the implication clear. There was no place for us at the tables that had been carefully arranged and planned. We were uninvited guests who would have to be accommodated rather than welcomed. For the next hour, we moved through the cocktail reception like actors in a play where everyone else knew their lines and we were improvising. Extended family members greeted me with the kind of surprised warmth that suggested they'd been told I wouldn't be attending. Conversations would pause when we approached, then resume with slightly forced enthusiasm. I kept looking for Maya, wanting to congratulate her personally and maybe understand why I hadn't been included in her special day. But she was constantly surrounded by bridesmaids and family friends, posing for photos and accepting congratulations from the people who mattered enough to be invited. The moment that broke me came when I was looking for the bathroom and overheard Mom talking to Ethan near the wine bar. I don't understand why she's here, Mom was saying in the stage whisper she used when she wanted to be overheard. This is Maya's night. It's supposed to be perfect. Maybe she didn't realize she wasn't invited, Ethan suggested. Oh, she realized. I was very clear with Megan's mother about the guest list. Brooke's name wasn't on it. Mom, she's still family. Ethan, darling, you have to understand. This wedding is important for our family's reputation. Maya's marrying into the Ashford family, and tonight is about making the right impression. Brooke's boyfriend is a high school teacher. He doesn't fit the image we're trying to project. I stood there behind a decorative column, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. This wasn't about me being too busy to attend. This wasn't about family dynamics or old resentments. This was about Liam not being good enough for their social performance. This was about me choosing love over status and them deciding that choice made me unworthy of inclusion. But she co-signed the loan for Dad's project, Ethan was saying. But doesn't that count for something? That's different. That's business. This is family. Business versus family. Useful versus lovable. Necessary versus wanted. In that moment, everything clicked into place. The loan cosign hadn't been about including me in the family legacy. It had been about using me when they needed something and discarding me when they didn't. I was good enough to guarantee their debts, but not good enough to sit at their tables. I was good enough to bail them out financially, but not good enough to be seen with the man I loved. I was good enough to be their safety net, but not good enough to be their daughter. I stumbled toward the bathroom, my vision blurring with tears I'd been holding back for 3 hours. But instead of going inside, I kept walking past the tasting room, past the carefully arranged lounge areas, all the way to the edge of the vineyard, where the manicured grounds gave way to actual working farmland. That's where Liam found me, sitting on a stone wall and crying harder than I'd cried since I was a child. "Hey," he sat down beside me and pulled me against his chest. "What happened? They don't want me here because of you, because you don't fit their image." I told him what I'd overheard, watching his face change as he processed the casual cruelty of my mother's words. "I'm so sorry," he said finally. "You're sorry, Liam. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. You love me for exactly who I am. You've never asked me to be anyone different, and they think you're not good enough. It's not about me being good enough, Brooke. It's about them being small people with small values who can't see past their own prejudices. But I brought you into this. I made you deal with my toxic family. You didn't make me do anything. I chose to be here because I love you and I wanted to support you. But baby, they're never going to accept me, because accepting me would mean admitting that their values are wrong. So what do? We go home. We go back to our real life with our real friends and our real relationship that doesn't require anyone's approval. But the wedding is tomorrow. If I leave now, I'll never be able to come back from this." Liam took my face in his hands, made me look at him. "Brooke, listen to me. You've already come back from this. You've built a life that has nothing to do with their approval. You have a career you love, friends who value you, a relationship that makes you happy. The only thing keeping you tied to their dysfunction is your own hope that they'll change. But they're my family." Family doesn't treat people the way they've treated you. Family doesn't exclude you and then act like it's your fault for being hurt. We sat there in the growing darkness, surrounded by the smell of ripening grapes and the distant sound of laughter from the party I'd never really been invited to. And slowly, the grief I'd been carrying for 28 years began to transform into something else. Clarity. The next morning, I woke up in our hotel room to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. The texts started around midnight and continued through the early morning hours, an escalating series of communications that told the story of a family in crisis mode. From Jennifer, "Where did you go? Mom is freaking out." From Megan, "Are you okay? Aunt Rachel said you left upset." From Ethan, "Brooke, call me. We need to talk." From Dad, "Your mother is very disappointed in your behavior last night." And finally, at 6:47 a.m. from Mom, "Don't come to the wedding. Do not contact the family during this important time. Family protocol must be maintained." Family protocol. There it was, again, the corporate language that reduced human relationships to policy decisions. But this time, instead of feeling hurt, I felt relieved. Because the text that was supposed to be my punishment had actually set me free. "Understood," I typed back, just like I had 2 months later in that Seattle conference room. But this time, I meant it differently. This time I understood that I was done. We checked out of the hotel and drove straight to the airport. While we waited for our flight back to Seattle, I made a phone call to my attorney. "David, it's Brooke Harrison. I need you to look into something for me. Remember that loan guarantee I signed for my father's company 3 years ago? I want to explore options for removing myself from the agreement." "Brooke, that's going to be complicated." "The bank required your signature for a reason. Removing a guarantor from an active loan typically requires either paying off the debt or finding a replacement guarantor with equivalent credit." What happens if I just withdraw my guarantee unilaterally? Well, the bank would likely call the loan immediately. Your family would need to either pay the full amount or find alternative financing within 30 days. And if they can't, then they'd be in default. The bank could seize collateral, pursue judgment against the primary borrowers. It could get messy very quickly. David, I need you to draft a letter withdrawing my guarantee and demanding immediate release from any future obligations. There was a long pause on his end of the phone. Brooke, are you sure about this? This kind of action could have serious consequences for your family's business. I looked across the gate at Liam, who was reading a book and drinking terrible airport coffee, completely content to wait for whatever decision I needed to make. This man who loved me enough to drive to Sonoma for a wedding where he wasn't wanted, who held me while I cried over people who would never deserve his kindness, who had spent 3 years watching my family treat me like a convenient resource rather than a beloved daughter. David, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. All right, I'll draft the letter and send it to Harrison Industries on Monday. But Brooke, once we do this, there's no going back. Good. I don't want to go back. As our plane lifted off from San Francisco International Airport, I watched the city shrink below us for what I thought might be the last time. Somewhere down there, my family was preparing for a wedding I would never attend, celebrating a love I would never be asked to witness, performing a version of family that had never included me in any meaningful way. But, for the first time in my life, I wasn't flying away from them in hurt or anger. I was flying toward something else, toward the life I'd built without their permission, toward the love I'd found without their approval, toward the person I'd become when I stopped asking them who I was allowed to be. The loan guarantee papers were in my safe deposit box in Seattle, my signature binding me to their financial decisions, for as long as they chose to keep me bound. But not for much longer. By Monday morning, David would send a letter that would change everything. A letter that would force them to choose between their financial security and their rejection of me. A letter that would make them understand, possibly for the first time, that actions have consequences, and that taking me for granted had a price. A letter that would finally make my signature as powerful as my absence. I spent the flight home thinking about Emma, the 7-year-old from the literacy gala, who had announced that Liam and I should get married because we laughed at the same things. Out of the mouths of babes, as they say. Because she was right. We did laugh at the same things. We valued the same things. We saw the world through the same lens of kindness and possibility. And maybe it was time to stop waiting for my family's permission to build the life I actually wanted. Maybe it was time to choose the people who chose me back. Maybe it was time to write my own story with characters who understood that love isn't something you have to earn through perfect behavior and financial favors. As the plane banked toward Seattle, toward home, toward Liam reaching for my hand in the dim cabin light, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the peace of resolution or reconciliation, but the peace of finally letting go of a rope I'd been holding on to for 28 years, hoping someone on the other end would pull me to safety. I was learning to swim instead. And the water was fine. Monday morning came faster than I expected, and with it, the point of no return. I was in my office by 7 a.m. reviewing David's draft letter one final time before he sent it to Harrison Industries. The legal language was precise and unforgiving: immediate withdrawal of personal guarantee, demand for release from all obligations, 30-day notice for the bank to secure alternative financing. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" David asked over the phone. "Once I send this letter, your family is going to be in a very difficult position." "Send it." "Brooke, I need to make sure you understand the implications. If Harrison Industries can't secure replacement financing within 30 days, the bank will call the loan. That's $1.2 million. They'll need to pay immediately." "I understand. And if they can't pay, the bank will pursue all available remedies. Seizure of assets, judgment against the company, potentially personal liability for your father and brother. This could destroy their business." I stared out my office window at Seattle's skyline, at the city that had given me everything my family never could: recognition for my achievements, respect for my choices, and the freedom to be exactly who I was. David, 3 days ago, I found out that my own family excluded me from a wedding because my boyfriend doesn't fit their social image, while I'm still legally responsible for over $1 million of their debt. They've used me when convenient and discarded me when inconvenient for 30 years. If their business can't survive without my signature propping it up, maybe it shouldn't survive at all. All right, I'm sending the letter now. At 8:47 a.m., David's letter was delivered via certified mail and email to Harrison Industries. By 9:15 a.m., the bank had been notified of my withdrawal from the guarantee. By 9:30 a.m., the bank had contacted Harrison Industries to discuss immediate restructuring of the loan terms. By 10:15 a.m., my phone started ringing. I let the first few calls go to voicemail, then a few more. By lunchtime, I had 30 missed calls from various members of my family and a string of increasingly frantic voicemails. Dad's first message was confused. "Brooke, there seems to be some misunderstanding about the loan guarantee. Call me immediately." His second message was concerned. "The bank is saying you've withdrawn your guarantee. This has to be a mistake. Call me back." His third message was angry. "What the hell do you think you're doing? You can't just withdraw from a legal agreement. Call me now." By his fifth message, he was furious. "You're jeopardizing everything we've worked for, everything Ethan has built. This is completely irresponsible, and I demand you fix it immediately." Mom's messages followed a similar trajectory, but with more emphasis on disappointment and family obligations. "Brooke, I don't know what's gotten into you, but this behavior is unacceptable. We raised you better than this. Your father is beside himself. How could you do this to your own family? This is about more than just money, Brooke. This is about loyalty, about being part of something bigger than yourself." Ethan's messages were different, less angry, more desperate. "Brooke, I know you're upset about the wedding thing, but this is serious. Can we please talk? I need you to understand what you're doing." The whole project could collapse. 2 years of work, dozens of jobs, families depending on this development. Please don't let your anger with Mom and Dad destroy something that matters to so many people. "I'm sorry. About everything. About the way they treated you, about not standing up for you more. But please, can we figure this out together?" I listened to every voicemail twice, trying to feel something other than relief. Trying to feel guilt or regret or family loyalty. But all I felt was the lightness that comes from finally cutting yourself free from anchor that's been dragging you down your entire life. That afternoon, my assistant buzzed me around 3 o'clock. "Brooke, there's a Martin Harrison here to see you. He says he's your father and it's urgent." My stomach dropped. Dad had never come to my office. In the 8 years I'd worked at Morrison and Associates, he'd never once visited me at work. The fact that he was here meant things were worse than I'd realized. "Tell him I'm in meetings all afternoon." I did. He said he'll wait. 2 hours later, my assistant buzzed again. "He's still here, and he's getting increasingly agitated. Should I call security?" I looked out through my office window and saw Dad pacing in our reception area like a caged animal. He was wearing one of his expensive suits, but his hair was disheveled and his tie was askew. This was not the composed, controlling Martin Harrison who'd raised me. This was a man in crisis. "I'll be right out." I walked into the reception area to find Dad cornering my assistant with what appeared to be an increasingly loud explanation of why he needed to see me immediately. "Dad, what are you doing here?" He spun around, his face flushed with anger and something that looked like panic. "What am I doing here? I'm trying to save our family business from your vindictive tantrum." "Lower your voice. This is my workplace." "Your workplace, Brooke. You've potentially destroyed everything we've built. The bank is demanding immediate payment or replacement guarantee. Do you have any idea what you've done?" I could feel my colleagues starting to stare. This was exactly the kind of scene I'd spent my entire career avoiding personal drama bleeding into professional space. We need to discuss this elsewhere. We need to discuss this now. You're going to call your lawyer and reverse this insanity immediately. I'm not going to do that. Yes, you are. Because if you don't, Harrison Industries goes under. Ethan's project fails. 20 families lose their jobs. And for what? Because you're sulking about a wedding invitation. That's when something inside me snapped. This has nothing to do with the wedding invitation, and everything to do with you treating me like a financial instrument instead of your daughter for the last 30 years. Don't be ridiculous. Everything we've done has been for this family. No, Dad. Everything you've done has been for Ethan. I'm just the backup plan you keep around in case you need a cosigner. Our voices were getting louder, despite my efforts to keep things quiet. I could see Tom Morrison, the senior partner, emerging from his office with a concerned expression. Mr. Harrison, I said as calmly as I could manage, I think you should leave. I'm not leaving until you fix this. Yes, you are. Tom had joined us, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent 40 years managing difficult clients. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises immediately. This is a family matter. This is my law firm, and you're disrupting our business operations. Security will escort you out if necessary. Dad looked around the reception area, finally registering that we had an audience of lawyers and staff who were watching him make a scene. For a man who valued appearances above almost everything else, this was perhaps the worst possible outcome. This isn't over, Brooke. Yes, it is. He left, but not before making sure everyone in the office knew exactly how he felt about my betrayal of family loyalty. Tom waited until the elevator doors closed before turning to me. You okay? I'm sorry about that. He's upset about a business matter. Don't apologize. Family drama happens to the best of us. But maybe next time take the meeting elsewhere. There won't be a next time. But I was wrong about that. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Mom. Palmer House Hotel. Noon. We need to talk. Not a request. A summons. I almost ignored it. Almost decided that I'd said everything I needed to say and there was no point in subjecting myself to another confrontation. But something about the message suggested this wasn't going to be another attempt to browbeat me into compliance. This felt like an ending. The Palmer House Hotel was one of those old San Francisco institutions that oozed understated elegance and old money. The kind of place where my family had always felt comfortable, where generations of Harrisons had conducted business and celebrated milestones. Neutral territory, but territory that favored them. I found them in the restaurant, seated at a corner table that provided privacy for what I assumed would be an unpleasant conversation. Mom was dressed like she was attending a board meeting, every hair in place, makeup, perfect jewelry, chosen to convey both elegance and seriousness. Dad was in full business mode, expensive suit. Gold watch, the kind of calculated casual that cost more than most people's monthly salaries. They looked like exactly what they were, wealthy people accustomed to getting their way, confronting a problem that money and influence couldn't solve. Brooke. Mom stood and kissed my cheek with the same air-kiss greeting she'd given me my entire life. Thank you for coming. Mom. Dad. We sat down like diplomats, negotiating a treaty each side, knowing that this conversation would determine the future of our relationship. I've ordered tea, Mom said, as if proper beverage service would somehow civilize what was about to happen. Let's skip the pleasantries, Dad said. We need to talk about the loan situation. There's nothing to talk about. I've withdrawn my guarantee. The decision is final. Brooke, you're being irrational, Mom said in the patient tone she'd always used when explaining why my feelings were inappropriate. I know you're upset about the wedding, but you can't let personal emotions destroy family business. This isn't about the wedding. This is about 30 years of being treated like I don't matter unless you need something from me. That's simply not true. Really? When was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you visited me in Seattle? When was the last time you asked about my life, my work, my relationship without it being connected to some favor you needed? Mom looked genuinely confused, like I'd asked her to solve a complex mathematical equation. We've always supported your choices, even when we didn't understand them. You've tolerated my choices when they didn't inconvenience you. There's a difference. Dad leaned forward, switching into negotiation mode. Brooke, I understand you feel unappreciated. That's on us, and we can work on that. But right now, we need to focus on solving the immediate problem. The bank is demanding either full payment or replacement guarantee by the end of the month. That sounds like a problem for Harrison Industries to solve. It's not that simple. The project is at a critical stage. If we lose financing now, we lose everything. 2 years of development work, architectural plans, permits, contractor agreements. Plus, the jobs. 20 families are depending on this project for their livelihoods. Then you should have thought about that before you excluded me from family events while keeping me financially liable for your business decisions. Those are two completely separate issues. No, Dad, they're not. You can't treat me like I'm not family and then demand family loyalty when you need my financial support. That's when Mom tried a different approach. Brooke, sweetheart, I know we've made mistakes. I know we haven't always shown you how much we value you. But we're asking you to be the bigger person here, to think about what's best for everyone, not just yourself. Be the bigger person. I'd been hearing that phrase my entire life. Be the bigger person when Ethan got opportunities I didn't. Be the bigger person when my achievements were overlooked. Be the bigger person when my feelings were dismissed. Always be the bigger person, never ask to be treated like an equal person. Mom, I've been the bigger person for 30 years. I'm tired. This is about more than your feelings, Brooke. This is about Ethan's future. About the family legacy. What about my future? What about my legacy? You have a successful career. You don't need this project the way Ethan does. I don't need this project at all, that's the point. Dad's patience was wearing thin. I could see him struggling to maintain the diplomatic approach Mom had obviously coached him on. Brooke, I'm going to be direct. If you don't reinstate your guarantee, Harrison Industries will likely be forced into bankruptcy. That means Ethan loses everything he's worked for. It means I lose the company my father built. It means your mother and I could lose our home. You'll lose your home. We've leveraged everything on this project. The house, our retirement accounts, even your grandmother's jewelry. If this fails, we lose it all. For the first time since this conversation started, I felt a flicker of something that might have been guilt. The house I'd grown up in, the financial security they'd built over decades, potentially gone because I'd withdrawn my signature from their loan. But then I remembered something Mom had said at the rehearsal dinner. That's business. This is family. You leveraged everything on a business project, and you didn't think to mention that when you asked me to co-sign. We didn't want to worry you with unnecessary details. Unnecessary details, Dad. You asked me to guarantee a loan that could destroy your entire financial future if it failed, and you thought those were unnecessary details. We never expected it to fail. But it is failing, isn't it? That's why you need my guarantee so desperately. That's why you can't just find replacement financing. The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. How bad is it? I asked. Mom and Dad exchanged a look that suggested they were debating how much truth to reveal. There have been some complications, Dad said carefully. Construction costs higher than projected, permit delays, some issues with the contractor, nothing that can't be solved with adequate financing. How much higher? About 40% over budget. 40%. On a $12 million project. These things happen in development. That's why you build in contingencies. Except you didn't build in contingencies. You leveraged everything and hoped for the best. We believed in the project. You believed in a fantasy. And when reality didn't match your projections, you decided the solution was to double down and risk everything. I sat back in my chair, trying to process the full scope of what they'd done. Not just to themselves, but to me. They'd asked me to co-sign a loan for a project they knew was financially unstable, without telling me the real risks involved. "You used me," I said quietly. "Not as a daughter, but as a signature. As a financial resource you could exploit when your own judgment proved inadequate. That's not how we see it. How you see it doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what you did." That's when Ethan walked in. I'd been so focused on the conversation with my parents that I hadn't noticed him approaching our table. He looked terrible, unshaven, wearing clothes that looked like he'd slept in them dark circles under his eyes, that suggested he hadn't been sleeping much at all. "Sorry I'm late," he said, sitting down without invitation. "Traffic was insane." "Ethan, we weren't expecting you," Mom said. "I know, but this involves me too, and I think Brooke deserves to hear the whole truth." There was something in his voice that made my stomach clench, a heaviness that suggested whatever he was about to say would change everything. "What truth?" I asked. Ethan looked at Dad, who was shaking his head almost imperceptibly. "The truth about why we really need your guarantee reinstated, the truth about why the project is failing, the truth about what Dad did when he realized we were in trouble." "Ethan, stop," Dad said sharply. "No, I can't stop, not anymore." Ethan turned to me, his eyes filled with something that looked like shame. "Brooke, there's something you need to know about the loan you co-signed." "What about it?" "It's not the only loan with your signature on it." The words hit me like cold water. "What do you mean? There are 2 other loans, smaller ones but still significant, about $400,000 each." "That's impossible. I only signed 1 set of documents." Ethan looked at Dad again, who was now staring at the table like he might disappear if he didn't make eye contact with anyone. "Dad forged your signature on the other 2 loans." The restaurant around us seemed to fade into background noise. I could hear the clink of silverware, the murmur of other conversations, the hum of the air conditioning. But it all felt very far away. "He what?" We were desperate. The first loan wasn't enough to cover the overruns, and the bank wouldn't extend additional credit without more guarantees. "Dad said it was just temporary, that we'd pay them off before you ever found out." I turned to look at Dad, who was finally meeting my eyes. "You forged my signature. I did what I had to do to save the project. You committed fraud using my identity. I protected my family's financial future. By making me liable for debts I never agreed to take on." Mom was staring at Dad like she'd never seen him before. "Martin, you didn't tell me about this." "I handled it. You handled it by forging our daughter's signature without telling me. Rachel, you don't understand the pressure I was under. The project was bleeding money. Contractors were threatening to walk. The bank was talking about calling the original loan. I had to do something." "So you decided to commit fraud?" "I decided to solve the problem." Ethan was shaking his head. "Dad, it wasn't solving the problem. It was just making it bigger. Those loans are coming due next month and we don't have the money to pay them." "How much?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Total exposure, including your original guarantee and the 2 forged loans, about $2 million. $2 million. My signature, real or fake, was now attached to $2 million in debt that I'd never agreed to and couldn't afford to cover." "We were going to tell you," Dad said. "Once the project was complete and profitable, we were going to explain everything and pay off all the loans." "When was that going to be?" "Next spring, if everything went according to plan." "But everything didn't go according to plan." "No." I sat there trying to wrap my mind around what I just learned. Not only had my family excluded me from important events while keeping me financially liable for their business decisions, but my father had also committed fraud in my name, potentially making me responsible for twice as much debt as I'd ever agreed to take on. "I could press charges," I said. "You could," Ethan said quietly. And you'd be completely justified. Dad looked up sharply. You wouldn't. Why wouldn't I? You committed a felony using my name. You put my credit, my financial future, my entire professional reputation at risk without my knowledge or consent. Because I'm your father. You're a man who forged his daughter's signature because he made bad business decisions and didn't want to face the consequences. The silence that followed was broken by Mom starting to cry. Not the elegant tears of a woman who cried beautifully, but the messy, makeup-destroying sobs of someone whose world was falling apart. I didn't know, she kept repeating. I didn't know he did that. Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. Mom, it's going to be okay. How is any of this going to be okay? Your father committed fraud. Our business is failing. We could lose everything. We're not going to lose everything, but we might lose some things. And maybe that's what needed to happen. I looked at my brother, really looked at him and saw something I'd never noticed before. He looked tired. Not just physically tired, but soul-deep exhausted, like he'd been carrying a weight that was too heavy for him. Ethan, are you okay? No, I'm not okay. I haven't been okay for a long time. He turned to Dad. This has to stop, all of it. The lying, the manipulation, the treating Brooke like she only matters when we need something from her. Ethan, you don't understand what you're saying. I understand perfectly. I understand that we've been using Brooke as our financial safety net while treating her like she's not really part of this family. I understand that you've been so focused on preserving the Harrison legacy that you've forgotten what family is supposed to mean. The business is our legacy. No, Dad, the business is just a business. Our relationships with each other are our legacy, and we've destroyed that. I felt something shift inside me as I watched Ethan stand up to Dad in a way I'd never seen before. This wasn't the golden boy who'd always been the favorite. This was a man who'd finally realized that being the favorite child in a dysfunctional family wasn't actually a prize worth winning. Brooke, Ethan said, turning to me. I'm sorry for all of it. For letting them exclude you while keeping you financially responsible. For not standing up for you more. For benefiting from a system that treated you like you were disposable. Ethan, I know sorry doesn't fix anything. I know it doesn't undo the damage. But I needed you to know that I see it now. I see how wrong we've been. I looked around the table at my family, Dad, defensive and desperate, still trying to control a situation that had long since spiraled beyond his control. Mom genuinely shocked by revelations that forced her to confront truths she'd been avoiding. Ethan finally willing to acknowledge what I'd been trying to tell them for years. I'm not pressing charges, I said finally. Dad's relief was visible. Thank you. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because I don't want this to define the rest of my life. I don't want to spend years in court proceedings reliving this betrayal over and over again. So you'll reinstate the guarantee? No, I'm done. With the loans with the business, with pretending that we're a functional family. Brooke, please. Dad, you forged my signature. You committed fraud in my name. The fact that I'm not sending you to prison doesn't mean I'm going to continue enabling your bad decisions. What about the project? What about the families depending on those jobs? That's not my responsibility. It never was. You made promises you couldn't keep using money you didn't have backed by guarantees you obtained through fraud. The consequences of those decisions belong to you. I stood up from the table feeling lighter than I had in years. Where are you going? Mom asked. Home. To Seattle. To my real life. This is your real life too. We're your family. No, you're the people I'm related to. There's a difference. I started to walk away, then turned back. Ethan, if you want to have a relationship with me going forward, it has to be separate from this. Separate from the business. Separate from Mom and Dad's expectations. Separate from the Harrison family performance. Just us as individuals, who happen to be siblings. I'd like that. Good. Call me when you figure out who you are when you're not trying to be the son they wanted. As I walked out of the Palmer House Hotel, I could hear Mom calling my name, but I didn't turn around. I'd spent 30 years turning around when they called, hoping this time would be different. This time was different. This time, I kept walking. Outside, the San Francisco sun was bright and warm, and for the first time in my entire life, I felt like I could breathe in this city. Not because anything had changed about the place, but because everything had changed about me. I was no longer Ethan Harrison's disappointing sister. I was no longer Martin and Rachel Harrison's backup plan. I was no longer the family member who existed at their convenience. I was just Brooke. And for the first time in my life, that felt like enough. My phone buzzed with a text from Liam. "How did it go?" I typed back, "It's over, all of it. Coming home. I'll pick you up at the airport." As I walked toward my rental car, I thought about the conference room in Seattle where this story had started. About the text from Mom that had seemed like the end of the world, and how it had turned out to be the beginning of my freedom. Understood, I'd written back then. And now I finally did understand. I understood that family isn't about blood or obligation or shared last names. It's about love and respect and choosing each other every day, not just when it's convenient. I understood that I didn't need their approval to be worthy of love. I understood that I'd wasted 30 years trying to earn something that should have been freely given. Most importantly, I understood that it was time to go home, to the life I'd built, to the man who loved me without conditions, to the city where I was valued for who I was, rather than dismissed for who I wasn't. The Harrison family legacy could survive or fail without me. Either way, I was finally free to write my own story. And it was going to be beautiful. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose yourself over people who never chose you. What do you think about Brooke's decision? Have you ever had to cut ties with toxic family members? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, hit that subscribe button for more real-life family drama that'll make you grateful for your own relationships. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.